The stagecoach didn't slow down much when it threw her off. Evelyn Mercer hit the ground outside Ash Hollow hard enough to taste copper and dirt, her carpet bag skidding 6 feet ahead before splitting open and spilling her life into the dust. A cracked hand mirror, 2 dresses that had seen better years, a single book with water-damaged pages. The driver didn't look back. Neither did the other passengers, their faces pale blurs through the window as the coach lurched forward, wheels grinding against rock and hardpan as it pushed toward somewhere that wasn't here. She lay there for a moment, cheek pressed against dirt that smelled like old fire and animal bones, and wondered if this was what dying felt like. Not dramatic, just hot and embarrassing and thoroughly complete. Her ribs screamed when she tried to breathe. Her left eye had already swollen halfway shut. That was Victor's work from 2 nights ago, his ring leaving a split in her cheekbone that still wept blood when she moved wrong. The bruises around her throat were 3 days old, finger-shaped shadows that turned her voice into something rough and animal. She'd loved him once, believed him when he said Denver would be their fresh start, that the rumors about his temper were jealous lies from small-minded people. She'd been stupid enough to think a man who hit a woman in private might somehow transform into someone decent under a different sky. The truth came out slowly, the way rot does. First his gambling, then his drinking, then his hands, which started gentle and ended brutal. The final straw came when she'd found the deed to her father's land she'd inherited after the fever took him, hidden in Victor's coat pocket, already signed over in her name by a forger who had done decent work. Victor had planned to sell it the moment they reached Denver, pocket the cash, and she'd have been legally bound to a man who'd stolen her inheritance before the honeymoon ended. She'd confronted him in a boarding house in Julesburg. He'd beaten her badly enough that the proprietor threatened to send for the law. Victor had laughed, paid for the broken chair, and told Evelyn if she opened her mouth again he'd make sure it was the last thing she ever did. Then he'd put her on this stagecoach with a ticket to nowhere and $5 she'd managed to hide in her boot. Told her to disappear, said if he ever saw her face again, he'd kill her slow. The stagecoach driver had known. She'd seen it in his eyes when Victor handed over the fare, the way he wouldn't look at her directly, complicit in the quiet violence men did to women when no one important was watching. Now here she was, Ash Hollow, a settlement barely worth the name, squatting mean and low at the edge of Indian territory, where civilization frayed into something meaner. A place people came to forget or be forgotten. She pushed herself onto her hands and knees. The world tilted hard, nausea rolling through her gut like a flash flood. Blood dripped from her nose onto the backs of her hands. She watched it fall, oddly detached, like she was observing someone else's disaster from a great distance. The street, if you could call it that, was empty except for a yellow dog sleeping in the shadow of a crooked storefront. Buildings leaned against each other like drunks, their wood bleached gray by sun and neglect. She could see a saloon, a mercantile, something that might have been a land office or a brothel or both. Smoke rose thin and listless from a chimney somewhere behind the main drag. No one came to help. She gathered her scattered belongings with shaking hands, stuffing them back into the ruined carpet bag. The book's spine had cracked. She ran her thumb over it, Wuthering Heights, her mother's favorite, and felt something crack inside her chest that had nothing to do with Victor's fists. You planning to sit there all day? Or you looking for someone in particular? The voice came from her left. She turned her head too fast and the world swam again, but she caught a glimpse of a man standing in the shade of the mercantile's overhang. Tall, lean in the way scarecrows are lean, wearing a dusty black coat despite the heat. His hat brimmed threw his face into shadow, but she could see a dark beard shot through with gray and eyes that measured her like she was livestock at auction. "I'm fine," she said, which was possibly the most obvious lie she'd ever told. "Sure you are." He stepped into the sunlight and she revised her initial impression. Not old, but worn. Maybe 40. Hard used. A scar ran from his right eyebrow into his hairline, pale against weathered skin. His gun sat low on his hip in a way that suggested he knew exactly how to use it. Question stands. You got people here, or you just passing through in the worst possible way? Her voice broke. She swallowed, tasted blood. "I was told there might be work. Teaching." His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Someone lied to you. We got maybe 30 people in this whole godforsaken stretch, half of them barely literate, and exactly 0 children old enough for schooling. Nearest real town is 2 days' ride north. The words hit her like fists. She'd known the advertisement was too good to be true. Teacher wanted, frontier settlement, room and board included. But she'd been desperate enough to believe it anyway. Now she understood. Victor had paid someone to plant that ad, had made sure she'd end up here, in the middle of nothing, with no money and no way forward. He'd meant for her to die out here, slowly, if possible.
Christ, the man said, and there was something almost gentle in it. He'd dump you, or did you run? Does it matter?
Might. He crouched down, bringing himself to eye level. Up close she could see more scars, a puckered bullet wound high on his left shoulder, visible where his shirt collar gaped open. His hands were calloused, knuckles scarred, the hands of someone who'd spent a lifetime doing hard things. Name's Silas Boone. I run a ranch about 6 miles south. It ain't much, but it's got a roof and a well, and I've got a housekeeper who won't ask stupid questions. You want to die in this street? That's your business. But if you'd rather not, I can get you somewhere safe for a few days while you figure out what comes next. Sit down.
She stared at him. Why? Why what? Why would you help me? You don't know me. I could be...
Trouble? Yeah, probably. He stood, offered his hand. But I've seen enough women in your position to know how this story ends if someone doesn't step in. So I'm stepping in. You can come willing or you can sit here and bleed. Your choice. The smart thing would have been to refuse. Evelyn had learned the hard way that men who offered help usually wanted something in return, and the payment was rarely cash. But she was out of smart options. Out of options entirely, really, except for dying or not dying, and despite everything Victor had done to her, she wasn't quite ready to give up that last scrap of spite. She took his hand. His grip was solid, impersonal, and he pulled her up without ceremony. Her vision grayed at the edges, but she stayed on her feet, barely. There's a wagon around back, Silas said. Can you walk, or do I need to carry you? I can walk. It was mostly true. She made it to the wagon under her own power, though Silas stayed close enough to catch her if she went down. The wagon itself was nothing special, rough wood, 2 horses that looked patient and mean in equal measure, but the seat had a blanket folded on it, and when she climbed up, her body sagged with relief so profound it felt like prayer. Silas swung up beside her and snapped the reins. The horses moved without enthusiasm, pulling them away from Ash Hollow's miserable little main street and out into open country. They rode in silence for the better part of an hour. The land stretched out flat and endless, broken only by scrub brush and the occasional twisted tree. Heat shimmered off the ground in waves. Evelyn watched it, her mind oddly blank, as if her body had finally used up all the fear and anger and despair it could manufacture, and now she was just empty. You got a name? Silas asked eventually. Evelyn Mercer. You from out east? Philadelphia, originally. He nodded like that explained something. Long way from home. I don't have a home anymore. Everyone's got a home. Sometimes you just haven't built it yet. It was the kind of thing that should have sounded stupid, frontier philosophy from a man who probably couldn't read. But there was no condescension in his voice, no judgment, just fact. What about you? She asked. Where are you from? Missouri. Went west during the war, never saw a reason to go back. He adjusted his grip on the reins. Lost my wife and daughter to cholera in '68. Figured if I was going to be alone, might as well be alone somewhere that doesn't remind me of them every time I turn around. The honesty of it startled her. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable beneath the hat brim. Listen, I'm going to say this once so we're clear. Whatever you're running from, it's your business. I don't need to know details, but if trouble follows you to my property, I need to know what kind of trouble it is so I can handle it appropriate. Understand? She thought about Victor's last words to her. If I ever see you again, I'll kill you slow. His name is Victor Hale, she said quietly. We were engaged. It didn't work out. He put me on that stagecoach and told me if I came back, he'd make sure I regretted it. He hit you? Yes. More than once? Yes. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then, if he shows up, I'll handle it. You don't have to worry about that. You don't know him. I know his type. They're all the same. Big men who pick fights, they know they can win.
and the second someone pushes back, they fold like bad poker hands. His jaw tightened. He won't touch you again. That's a promise. Evelyn wanted to believe him, but she'd believed Victor once too, and look where that had gotten her. The ranch appeared gradually, shimmering into existence like a mirage. It wasn't much, a low-slung house with a sagging porch, a barn that had seen better decades, a corral holding 4 horses and a mule. A windmill creaked slowly in the hot breeze, pulling water from some underground source she couldn't see. Chickens scratched in the dirt near the house. Laundry hung limp on a line. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. A woman emerged from the house as they pulled up, wiping her hands on her apron. She was older, maybe 60, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile somewhere around 1850. "Found her in town," Silas said by way of explanation. "She needs a place to stay. Few days, maybe longer." The woman looked Evelyn over with the critical eye of someone evaluating livestock. "She hurt bad?" "Bad enough. Ribs, maybe. Face? She needs cleaning up and feeding." "She got a name, or are we just calling her she from now on?" "Evelyn Mercer," Evelyn said, her voice stronger than she felt. "And I can hear you." The older woman's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Martha Cowan. I keep house for Mr. Boone, do the cooking, handle things that need handling. You give me trouble, I'll boot you out myself. We clear?" "Crystal. Good. Come on then. Let's see what we're working with." Evelyn climbed down from the wagon, her body protesting every movement. Martha took her arm, not gently, but not unkindly either, and steered her toward the house. The interior was dim and blessedly cool. Martha sat her at a scarred wooden table and disappeared into another room, returning with a basin of water, clean rags, and a bottle of something that smelled medicinal and mean. "This is going to hurt," Martha said matter-of-factly. "Everything hurts." "Fair point." She soaked a rag and started cleaning the blood from Evelyn's face with efficient, practiced movements. The split on her cheekbone stung like fire when Martha dabbed at it, but Evelyn bit down on her lip and stayed still. "Man do this to you?" "Yes." "He dead?" "No." "Pity. Hold still." She tilted Evelyn's chin up, examining the bruises on her throat. "These are a few days old. You run or he throw you out?" "Both." Martha nodded like she'd expected that answer. "Well, you're here now. Silas doesn't make promises he can't keep, so if he said you're safe, you're safe. But that don't mean you can sit around feeling sorry for yourself. We work for our keep out here. You able to work?" "Yes." "Can you cook?" "Some." "So?" "Well enough." "Read and write?" "Yes." Martha sat back, considering. "Silas mentioned you were looking for teaching work. That true? Or just something you told him?" "It's true. I saw an advertisement, but he said there aren't any children here." "Not yet, but folks are starting to trickle in. Another year or two there might be enough to warrant a school." She wrung out the rag, the water turning pink. "Question is, you planning to stick around that long, or you just passing through?" Evelyn didn't have an answer for that. A week ago, she'd had a future, or thought she did. Marriage, a home in Denver, maybe children someday. Now she had nothing except the clothes on her back and $5 in her boot. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Well, figure it out." Martha stood, gathering the basin. "There's a room off the kitchen, nothing fancy, but it's clean. You can stay there as long as you need. Dinner's at 6. You're welcome to join us or not, your choice, but food doesn't keep in this heat, so if you miss it, you go hungry. Understood?" "Yes, thank you." Martha paused at the doorway. "Don't thank me yet. Wait and see if you still feel grateful after a week of hauling water and plucking chickens." She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Evelyn alone in the dim room. Through the window, she could see Silas unhitching the horses, his movements economical and sure. He glanced toward the house once, as if checking to make sure she hadn't vanished, then went back to his work. Evelyn touched her face gently, feeling the swelling, the tender places where Victor's fists had landed. She'd come west believing in fresh starts and second chances, in the idea that a person could outrun their past if they just moved fast enough. Now she knew better. The past didn't chase you. It rode alongside, patient as death, waiting for you to slow down. But maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to run anymore.
Maybe she could stand still for once, let herself heal, figure out who she was when she wasn't busy surviving. It was a thin hope, fragile as spun glass, but it was hers. The first week passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion. Evelyn's ribs turned out to be cracked. Not broken, Martha determined after a careful examination, but bad enough that breathing hurt and sleeping was nearly impossible. She spent most of those early days in the small room off the kitchen, drifting in and out of fevered sleep, while her body tried to knit itself back together. Martha brought her food at regular intervals: thin soup, bread, water. She didn't talk much, but her presence was steady, undemanding. Sometimes Evelyn would wake to find her sitting in the chair by the window, mending clothes or shelling peas, her hands moving with the unconscious grace of someone who'd done the same task 1,000 times before. Silas she saw less often. He worked the ranch from dawn until well past dark, coming in only for meals and sleep. But she was aware of him in the way you're aware of a storm on the horizon, a constant looming presence that changed the shape of everything around it. On the 8th day, Evelyn woke feeling almost human. The swelling in her face had gone down enough that she could see out of both eyes again, and her ribs had settled into a dull, manageable ache instead of the sharp agony that had plagued her earlier. She got up slowly, dressed in one of her salvaged dresses, the blue one, which had come through the carpetbag disaster relatively unscathed, and made her way into the kitchen. Martha glanced up from the stove. "You're up." "I'm up. How do you feel?" "Like I got thrown from a stagecoach and landed on my face." "Accurate?" Martha turned back to whatever she was cooking. "You hungry?" "Starving." "Good. Sit down. Coffee's fresh." Evelyn poured herself a cup and sat at the table, wrapping her hands around the mug. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot and real, and it made her feel anchored in a way she hadn't felt since Philadelphia. Martha set a plate in front of her: eggs, bacon, bread fried in the bacon grease. "Eat." She did, and it was the best meal she'd had in months. When she looked up, Martha was watching her with an expression that might have been approval. "You got some color back," the older woman observed. "Good. Means you're not about to die on us." She refilled Evelyn's coffee without being asked. "Silas wants to talk to you after breakfast. Don't look scared. You're not in trouble. He just has questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind you answer honest or not at all." Martha's expression was unreadable. "He's a fair man, but he don't tolerate liars. Keep that in mind." She found Silas on the porch, working leather into submission with strong, patient hands. He was mending a bridle, his movements precise despite the heat. When he saw her, he set the leather aside and gestured to the chair beside him. "You look better," he said. "I feel better. Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me. Just doing what's right." He leaned back, studying her with those steady, measuring eyes. "Martha says you're strong enough to talk straight. That true?" "Yes." "Good, because I need to know what your plans are. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. That hasn't changed. But winter's coming in 4 months, and this ain't the kind of place you want to be stuck if you don't have a plan." Evelyn had thought about this during the long, painful nights. Thought about going back east, finding work as a seamstress or a maid. Thought about disappearing into some big city where Victor would never find her. Thought about all the safe, sensible options a woman in her position was supposed to consider. Then she'd thought about the advertisement, the lie that had brought her here. "You said there might be children here eventually," she said. "Enough for a school. Maybe. Year or two down the line, if the settlement grows. What if I stayed? Helped it grow?" Silas raised an eyebrow. "How do you figure?" "Families don't come to places that don't have schools. But if there was already a teacher here waiting, someone who could teach reading, writing, arithmetic, that might change things. Make Ash Hollow look like a real town instead of just another dying settlement. You'd be teaching empty rooms for months, maybe longer." "I know. And you'd still need to eat, work. Can't live on hope." "I can work." Martha said as much. "I'll earn my keep however you need." She met his eyes. "I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Boone. I'm asking for a chance." He was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then, "Call me Silas. And all right, you want to stay? You can stay. But understand, this place is hard, the land's hard, the weather's hard, the people are hard. You think you've had it rough? Wait until you spend a winter out here with nothing but wind and snow and your own thoughts for company." "I'll manage." Yeah. He picked up the bridle again, his hands resuming their work. I believe you might. It wasn't enthusiasm, but it was permission. And right now, that was enough. She started teaching 3 weeks later in a room above the mercantile that smelled like old flour and mouse droppings. The school was nothing. A space the mercantile owner, a dour man named Callahan, had agreed to let her use in exchange for teaching his wife to read. Evelyn swept it out, scrubbed the floor, begged a few chairs from various townspeople, and opened the doors. No one came. She sat there for 3 days straight, morning until afternoon, waiting. On the 4th day, Callahan's wife appeared, a shy woman named Anne, who'd been married at 15 and never learned her letters. They worked through the alphabet together, Anne's face fierce with concentration as she traced each letter with her finger. I always wanted to read the Bible, Anne confessed during a break, but my husband reads it to me, and I never know if he's telling it true or adding his own bits. Does he add his own bits often? Anne smiled just a little. More often than he thinks I notice. 2 weeks later, a farmer brought his son, a sullen boy of 12 who could barely write his own name. Then a widow brought her daughter. Then 2 more children, siblings whose parents had died crossing the plains, and who were being raised by an uncle who didn't have time to teach them anything except how to work. It wasn't much, but it was something. Evelyn taught them the way she'd been taught back in Philadelphia, firmly, patiently, with the understanding that education was both a gift and a weapon, something that could open doors or close them depending on how you wielded it. She made them read aloud, corrected their grammar gently, showed them how numbers could build things or tear them down. And slowly, word spread. The settlement began to change around her. New families arrived, drawn by rumors of a school teacher, of a place that might actually have a future. The mercantile expanded. Someone opened a boarding house. The saloon got a fresh coat of paint. Ash Hollow started to look less like a place people came to die and more like somewhere they might actually live. Through it all, Silas remained a constant, steady presence. He brought her supplies when she needed them, books, mostly, ordered from a catalog at great expense. He fixed the schoolroom's leaking roof without being asked. When one of the parents complained that Evelyn was teaching inappropriate material, she'd assigned Uncle Tom's cabin, Silas had a quiet word with the man, and the complaint stopped. They fell into an easy rhythm, the 3 of them, Evelyn, Silas, and Martha. Dinners together at the ranch, long evenings on the porch, talking or not talking as the mood struck. Sometimes Silas played a battered harmonica he kept in his coat pocket, slow, mournful songs that seemed to rise up from the land itself. Sometimes Evelyn read aloud from whatever book she was teaching, her voice carrying across the empty plains. It was the closest thing to peace she'd ever known. And then, on a cold October afternoon, Victor Hale rode into Ash Hollow with violence in his eyes and murder in his heart. The first warning came from a drifter who stopped at the mercantile for supplies. He was heading north, he said, away from a man he'd seen in the last town, drunk, mean, asking questions about a woman with dark hair and a Philadelphia accent. The drifter didn't know the man's name, but he knew trouble when he saw it, and he figured someone in Ash Hollow might want a heads up. Callahan told Anne. Anne told Evelyn. Evelyn felt her stomach drop through the floor. Could be anyone, Anne said, her hand on Evelyn's arm. Lots of men get drunk and ask stupid questions. Doesn't mean it's him. But Evelyn knew. The way you know a storm is coming before the sky even darkens. Victor had found her. She finished the school day on autopilot, her voice steady even as her hands shook. The children didn't notice. They were too absorbed in their arithmetic problems, tongues poking out in concentration as they scratched numbers onto their slates. When the last one left, she sat at her desk and stared at the wall, trying to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do now. Run! That was the obvious answer. Pack her meager belongings, beg a ride from someone heading in any direction that wasn't here, disappear before Victor arrived. She'd done it before. She could do it again, except she didn't want to. That was the problem. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she'd built something that mattered. These children, this school, this ridiculous half-formed settlement in the middle of nowhere. It was hers in a way nothing had ever been hers before. The thought of abandoning it made her physically ill. You planning to sleep here, or you coming back to the ranch? She jerked her head up. Silas stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his expression unreadable in the fading light. How long have you been standing there? She asked. Long enough to see you've had bad news." He stepped inside, his boots loud on the wooden floor. "Anne told Martha. Martha told me. So let's skip the part where you pretend everything's fine and get straight to what you're going to do about it." "I don't know what I'm going to do about it." "That's a lie. You're thinking about running." He pulled out one of the children's chairs and sat, looking absurd on the small seat. "Question is whether you're actually going to do it, or whether you're going to trust that maybe you don't have to face this alone." Evelyn's throat tightened. "You don't understand what he's like, don't I?" Silas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've fought in a war, buried a wife and child, and spent the last 8 years watching men like your Victor swagger through settlements looking for someone weaker to hurt. I understand exactly what he's like. What I don't understand is why you think you're still the same woman he threw off that stagecoach 4 months ago. I'm not. You've built a school, taught 15 children how to read and write, stood up to parents who thought you were too young or too female or too Eastern to know what you were doing. You've done more in 4 months than most people do in years." His voice was firm, not unkind. "So when he shows up, and he will show up, you're not going to run. You're going to stand your ground and let him see exactly who you've become. And if he's stupid enough to try something, I'll handle it. We clear?" She wanted to argue, wanted to explain that it wasn't that simple, that Victor didn't care about her accomplishments or her strength or anything except his wounded pride and his need to reassert control. But looking at Silas's face, she realized he already knew all of that. He just didn't care. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "You barely know me. I know enough." He stood, settling his hat back on his head. "Besides, I told you the first day. He won't touch you again. I don't make promises I can't keep." The certainty in his voice should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified her. Because she knew what men like Victor did to men who got in their way, and the thought of Silas getting hurt because of her was somehow worse than the thought of Victor finding her in the first place. But she nodded anyway, because what else could she do? Victor arrived 3 days later on a Thursday afternoon when the sky was the color of old bruises and the wind carried the smell of coming snow. Evelyn was in the schoolroom helping one of the younger girls sound out words in a primer when she heard the horse outside. She knew it was him before she even looked up. Some instinct, bone deep and animal, that recognized danger the way prey recognizes a predator. She set down the book carefully. "Sarah, I need you to go home now." "But we're not finished. Now please." Something in her voice must have registered because Sarah gathered her things without further argument and slipped out the back door. Evelyn stood, smoothed her skirt with hands that wanted to shake, and walked to the window. Victor sat astride a bay horse in the middle of the street, looking around Ash Hollow with the expression of a man surveying a particularly disappointing purchase. He'd lost weight since she'd last seen him. His face was leaner, harder, with new lines carved around his mouth. But his eyes were the same. Cold and assessing and mean. He spotted her in the window and smiled. She felt that smile like a physical blow, a fist to the solar plexus that drove all the air from her lungs. For a moment she was back in that boarding house in Julesburg, Victor's hand around her throat, his voice in her ear promising things that made her skin crawl. Then the moment passed and she was just angry. She walked out of the schoolroom and stood on the steps, arms crossed, and waited. Victor dismounted with the exaggerated care of someone who'd been drinking but wasn't quite drunk yet. He tied his horse to the post outside the mercantile and walked toward her with that loose, confident stride she'd once found charming. "Well," he said when he was close enough for her to smell the whiskey on his breath. "Don't you look civilized? Got yourself a little schoolhouse and everything? Very industrious?" "What do you want, Victor?"
"What do I want?" He laughed, sharp and humorless. "I want to know what the hell you think you're doing, setting up shop in the middle of nowhere like some kind of pioneer woman. You think you can just walk away from me? From us?" "There was no us. There was you hitting me and me leaving before you killed me. That's not complicated." His expression darkened. "Watch your mouth."
"Or what? You'll hit me again? In front of the whole town?" She gestured at the street where several people had stopped to watch. Callahan stood in the doorway of the mercantile, arms crossed. 2 farmers she recognized from church were leaning against the saloon wall. Even the yellow dog had woken up, watching the scene with lazy interest. Go ahead. Let's see how that works out for you. For a second, she thought he might actually do it. His hand twitched toward her face, and she saw the calculation in his eyes, weighing his pride against the audience. Then he seemed to think better of it and stepped back, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm not here to fight, he said, his tone shifting to something approximating reasonable. I'm here because I was worried about you. You disappeared. No word, no way to find you. I thought something terrible had happened. You put me on that stagecoach. You told me if I came back, you'd kill me. I was angry. People say things they don't mean when they're angry. He took another step closer and she held her ground, refusing to retreat. Listen, Evelyn, I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you, but I've changed. I've stopped drinking, stopped gambling. I've gotten my life together. And I came all this way to tell you that I'm sorry, to ask you to give me another chance. It was a good performance. His voice was earnest, his eyes soft with what might have been genuine regret if you didn't know better. If she'd been the woman he'd thrown away 4 months ago, she might have even believed him. But she wasn't that woman anymore. No, she said simply. No? No, I don't forgive you, I don't want to see you, and I don't care if you've changed or not. What we had is over. It's been over, so get back on your horse and leave. His mask slipped, just for a second. She saw the rage underneath, hot and vicious, before he wrestled it back under control. You're making a mistake. I've made plenty of mistakes. You were one of them. Now I'm correcting it. Evelyn, she told you to leave. Silas's voice cut across the street like a knife. He stood in front of the mercantile, thumbs hooked in his belt, his posture deceptively relaxed. But Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his right hand hung loose near his gun. Victor turned, sizing Silas up with the quick, dismissive glance of a man used to being the most dangerous person in the room. This doesn't concern you, friend. She's living on my property, teaching children in my town. That makes it my concern. Silas walked forward slowly, closing the distance between them with measured steps. You've said your piece. She's given you her answer. Time for you to move along. My town? Victor's laugh was ugly. You own this shithole? I help keep it standing, which is more than you've ever done for anything in your life, I'd wager. The insult landed. Victor's face flushed dark red and his hand dropped to the gun on his hip. Not drawing, not yet, but making the threat clear. You want to repeat that? I could, but I don't think your hearing's the problem. Silas stopped about 10 feet away, his expression unchanged. Here's how this is going to work. You're going to get on your horse, ride out of Ash Hollow, and never come back. If you do come back, if you so much as look at Miss Mercer wrong, I will put you in the ground. That's not a threat. That's a promise. The street had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to have stopped, holding its breath. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs hard enough to hurt. Victor stared at Silas for a long moment. Then he smiled, slow and cold. You're in love with her. That's what this is. You think because you gave her a roof and played the hero, she's going to... What I think isn't your business. Last chance. Ride away or get buried here. Your choice. For a second, Evelyn was certain Victor would draw. She could see it in his eyes, that moment of calculation where pride warred with survival instinct. His fingers flexed near his gun and she heard someone gasp, Anne maybe, or one of the farmers. Then Victor's hand relaxed and he laughed, shaking his head. You know what? You deserve each other. A dried-up rancher and a whore who couldn't keep a man if she tried. Have a nice life in your dying town. He turned to leave and Evelyn felt relief flood through her, so powerful it made her knees weak. It was over. He was leaving. She'd stood up to him and he was actually leaving. Then he spun back around, his gun clearing leather in a smooth, practiced motion, the barrel coming up fast toward Silas. She screamed, or tried to. The sound died in her throat as Silas moved. She'd never seen anyone draw that fast. 1 second his hand was at his side, the next his gun was up and firing, the sound massive and flat in the open air. Victor's shot went wide, his gun dropping from suddenly nerveless fingers as he staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. Blood welled between his fingers, dark and wet. You shot me, he said, his voice stunned. You actually shot me. You drew first. Everyone here saw it. Silas kept his gun trained on Victor, his voice flat and cold. Now you've got two options. You can get on your horse and leave while you can still ride, or you can stay here and bleed out in the street. What's it going to be?" Victor looked around wildly, as if expecting someone to help him, but the townspeople just stared back, their faces carefully neutral. No one moved, no one spoke. "This isn't over," Victor spat, still clutching his shoulder. Blood dripped onto the dirt between his boots. "You hear me? This isn't over." "Yes, it is." Silas's voice carried absolute certainty. "You just don't know it yet." Victor stumbled to his horse, managed to pull himself into the saddle with his good arm. He looked at Evelyn one last time, his expression promising violence and revenge, then kicked his horse into a gallop and disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Callahan started clapping, slow at first, then faster, and within seconds half the street had joined in. People emerged from buildings, calling out congratulations and approval. Someone slapped Silas on the back. Anne ran to Evelyn, pulling her into a fierce hug. "Are you all right?" Anne asked, her voice muffled against Evelyn's shoulder. "I don't know," Evelyn said honestly. Her whole body was shaking, adrenaline draining away and leaving her hollow. "I think so." Silas holstered his gun and walked over to them. Up close, she could see the tension in his jaw, the tight line of his mouth. "You hurt?" "No. You?" "Fine." He glanced at the blood on the ground where Victor had stood. "He'll live. Shoulder wounds painful but not fatal, though infection might take him if he's stupid enough to ignore it." "Will he come back?" "No." Silas said it with such flat certainty that she almost believed him. Men like that are cowards at heart. He had his chance and he lost. He won't risk it again. Evelyn wanted to believe that, but she'd seen the look in Victor's eyes, and she knew better than to think this was truly finished. Men like Victor didn't accept defeat. They nursed their wounds and waited for another opportunity. But that was a problem for another day. Right now she was still standing, still breathing, still here. "Thank you," she said quietly. Silas nodded once, then turned and walked back toward his wagon, leaving her surrounded by well-wishers and questions she didn't have the energy to answer. That night at the ranch, Martha made stew and nobody talked about what had happened. They ate in silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. When the meal was finished, Evelyn helped clean up and then retreated to her room, suddenly desperate to be alone. She lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation over and over in her mind. Victor's face, the gun rising, the shot, the blood. All of it happened so fast, and yet in her memory, it stretched out into something endless and terrible. She'd almost died today, or Silas had, or both of them. The fact that they hadn't felt less like victory and more like borrowed time. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "It's me," Martha called. "You decent? Come in." Martha entered carrying 2 cups of something that smelled like whiskey and honey. She handed one to Evelyn and sat in the chair by the window, her expression thoughtful. "You holding up?" she asked. "I honestly don't know." "That's fair." Martha sipped her drink. "For what it's worth, you did good today, standing up to him like that. Not many women would have had the spine." I was terrified. Courage isn't not being afraid. It's being afraid and doing it anyway. Martha set her cup down. "You know Silas is going to blame himself, right? For not ending it cleaner. For letting that bastard walk away with a chance to come back. Victor won't come back. You don't believe that any more than I do." Martha's voice was gentle but firm. "He's the type who needs the last word, the last hit. Men like that don't know how to let go." Evelyn took a long drink, feeling the whiskey burn its way down her throat. "So what do I do?" "You live your life. You keep teaching. You don't let him take one more thing from you than he already has." Martha stood, collecting the cups. "And if he does come back, you let Silas handle it. That man survived things that would have killed most people twice over. He'll survive this too." After Martha left, Evelyn lay awake listening to the wind rattle the windows. Somewhere in the house she could hear Silas moving around, the creak of floorboards under his weight. She wondered if he was having trouble sleeping too, if he was replaying the shooting in his mind the way she was. Eventually, exhaustion won and she drifted into uneasy sleep, her dreams full of gunshots and blood and Victor's cold smile. The next morning dawned gray and cold, the first real hint of the winter to come. Evelyn woke early,
dressed, and found Silas already up, drinking coffee on the porch despite the chill. She poured herself a cup and joined him, settling into the chair beside his. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun struggle to break through the clouds. "You ever kill a man before yesterday?" she asked finally. "Yes." "During the war? After? Frontier's not kind to people who can't defend themselves." He took a drink, his expression distant. "I don't enjoy it, if that's what you're wondering. But I don't lose sleep over it either. Some men need killing, that's just the truth of things." "Do you think Victor needs killing?" "I think Victor's the kind of problem that doesn't go away on its own." He looked at her, his eyes serious. "But I also think he's smart enough to know when he's outmatched. He won't come back. Not here. Not while I'm around." "And if you're not around?" "Then you shoot him yourself. You know how to use a gun?" "No." "Well, we'll fix that." He stood, draining the last of his coffee. "Come on, if we're going to do this, might as well start now." He taught her behind the barn, away from the house where Martha wouldn't see and disapprove. The gun he gave her was smaller than his, a Colt pocket revolver that fit her hand better than she expected. "It's loaded," he said, showing her how to check the cylinder. "Always assume it's loaded, even when you know it's not. That's how people get killed." He positioned her carefully, adjusting her stance until she stood with her feet shoulder-width apart, her weight balanced. Then he showed her how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling it, how to absorb the recoil without letting it throw off her next shot. "Don't close one eye," he instructed. "Keep both open. Focus on the target. The gun's just an extension of your arm. You're not trying to fight it. You're working with it." Her first shot went wide, the recoil surprising her despite his warning. The second hit the fence post they were using as a target, but barely. The third missed again. "You're anticipating the recoil," Silas said, "flinching before you fire. Try again, and this time keep your arm relaxed." She did. The fourth shot hit center mass on the post. Better. Again. They practiced until her arm ached and her ears rang from the noise. By the end of the session, she could hit the post 9 times out of 10, and Silas looked something close to satisfied. "You're not going to win any shooting competitions," he said, taking the gun back to reload it. "But you can hit what you're aiming at, and that's what matters. Practice every day, and you'll get better." "Do you really think I'll need to use it?" "I hope not, but hope's not a plan." He handed the gun back to her. "Keep this with you. In your room at night, in your bag during the day. Don't be stupid about it, but don't be helpless either." She took the gun, feeling its weight in her palm. It should have felt wrong. She'd been raised to believe that violence was the domain of men, that women were supposed to be soft and passive and protected. But it didn't feel wrong. It felt practical, necessary. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't had to use it." The weeks that followed settled into an uneasy routine. Evelyn taught her classes, practiced shooting, and tried not to jump at every unexpected sound. The settlement seemed to close ranks around her. Parents went out of their way to be friendly. Callahan extended her credit at the mercantile without being asked. Even the usually taciturn farmers nodded greetings when they passed on the street. Victor became a story they told, a piece of frontier mythology. The city man who'd tried to reclaim his woman and gotten shot for his trouble. The coward who'd drawn first and still lost. People embellished the details until Evelyn barely recognized the event they were describing. But at night, alone in her room with the Colt under her pillow, she knew the truth. Victor wasn't defeated, he was wounded, humiliated, and men like him didn't forget humiliation. She wasn't safe. She was just waiting. October bled into November. The first snow fell, light and tentative, melting before it could stick. The children in her classroom grew restless with the changing season, their attention wandering to the windows where they could watch the sky darken earlier each day. Evelyn found herself watching Silas more than she should, the way he moved through his work with quiet competence. The rare smile that softened his face when Martha said something particularly cutting. The patience he showed teaching her to shoot, never frustrated when she missed, always steady in his corrections. She'd never planned to care about him. Caring about people was dangerous. She'd learned that with Victor. But somehow, without her permission, Silas had become important. The thought of him getting hurt because of her made her chest tight with something that felt uncomfortably like fear. One evening in late November, she found him in the barn mending tack. She'd come to return a book he'd lent her, a collection of frontier stories that were probably meant to be exciting, but mostly just seemed sad. But she found herself lingering in the doorway, watching him work. "You gonna stand there all night, or you got something to say?" he asked without looking up. "I wanted to thank you, again, for everything."
"You've already thanked me. Multiple times." He set down the leather, finally meeting her eyes. "What's really on your mind?" She should have deflected, should have made an excuse and left. Instead, she heard herself say, "Why did you help me? That first day, you could have just left me in the street." "I told you, it was the right thing to do." "That's not an answer." He was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then, "I had a daughter. She'd be about your age now if she'd lived. And I'd like to think that if she'd ever been in trouble, some stranger would have helped her instead of walking past. So I helped you. Simple as that." It wasn't simple, and they both knew it. But Evelyn nodded anyway, accepting the answer for what it was. The truth, just not all of it. "The book was good," she said, changing the subject. "Depressing, but good."
"Most true things are depressing." He picked up the leather again. "You heading back to town tomorrow?"
"Yes. Why?"
"Storm's coming in. Big one, from the look of the sky.
You might want to stay here until it passes. Roads will be mud if you're lucky, ice if you're not."
"I can't cancel school. The children
will survive missing a few days. You won't survive pneumonia." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "Stay here. Teach them next week when the weather clears." She wanted to argue, but looking at his face, she realized he was right. And more than that, she realized she didn't actually want to leave. The ranch had become something like home in a way Ash Hollow's boarding house never had. "All right," she said, "I'll stay." The storm hit that night with a violence that made the walls shake. Wind screamed around the corners of the house, driving rain against the windows hard enough that Evelyn was certain the glass would break. Thunder rolled across the plains like artillery fire, and lightning turned the world outside into a stuttering nightmare of white and shadow. She lay in her bed listening to it, the Colt cold and heavy under her pillow, and tried not to think about Victor out there somewhere. Wounded, angry, planning. The next morning dawned cold and clear, the storm having blown itself out during the night. The world outside looked scrubbed clean, every surface sparkling with frost. Evelyn dressed and ventured into the kitchen to find Martha already making breakfast. "Sleep well?" Martha asked, not looking up from the stove. "Well enough, you?" "Like the dead. Always do after a big storm." She cracked eggs into a pan. "Silas is out checking the fences. One of them came down in the wind. He'll be back in an hour or so." Evelyn poured coffee and sat at the table, watching Martha work. The older woman moved with the same efficient grace she always did. No wasted motion, everything in its place. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said. "You can ask. Doesn't mean I'll answer. Why do you stay here? You could work anywhere. Why stay on a ranch in the middle of nowhere with a man who barely talks?" Martha was quiet for a moment, flipping the eggs. Then, "Because he needs me, and because I like knowing exactly what I'm worth and to who. Out here things are simple. I work, I get paid. I don't have to pretend to be something I'm not." She glanced over her shoulder. "Same reason you stay, I'd wager. I stay because I have nowhere else to go." "That's what you tell yourself, but you've got skills. You could teach anywhere. East, west, doesn't matter. You stay because you want to, not because you have to." Evelyn wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Because Martha was right. She could leave, could go back east, find a position in a proper school, live a normal life. But the thought filled her with something close to dread. She didn't want normal. She wanted this. The hard land, the impossible work, the people who'd closed ranks around her without being asked. She wanted Silas's quiet competence and Martha's sharp tongue and the children who worked twice as hard as their Eastern counterparts because they knew education was a luxury they couldn't take for granted. She wanted to belong somewhere, and against all logic, she belonged here. "You're not wrong," she admitted quietly. Martha smiled, just a little. "I usually aren't. Now set the table. Silas will be back soon and he gets cranky if breakfast is cold." The fence repair took Silas most of the morning. When he finally came back, his hands were raw from working wire in the cold, and his mood was darker than the storm clouds that had passed. He ate breakfast in silence while Martha and Evelyn exchanged glances across the table, neither one willing to break whatever was churning through his head. Finally, Martha had enough. You going to tell us what's eating you, or do we have to guess? Silas set down his fork, found tracks out by the southern fence line. Horse, maybe 2 days old. Rider stopped, looked around, then headed east. Evelyn's stomach dropped. You think it was... Don't know. Could have been anyone. Drifter, cowhand looking for work, someone lost. He met her eyes. But the track stopped right where you can see the house from the ridge. Whoever it was, they were watching. Victor, Evelyn said flatly. Maybe, maybe not. But I'm not taking chances. He pushed back from the table. I'm riding into town this afternoon. Going to talk to some people, see if anyone's seen strangers hanging around. You're staying here until I get back. I'm not a child who needs... I didn't say you were. I said you're staying here because it's safer, and I can't watch your back if I'm in town asking questions. His voice was hard, final. This isn't negotiable. Martha stood, collecting plates. Listen to him, girl. He's got that look he gets when he's about to do something stupid. Least you can do is not make it worse by being stubborn. Evelyn wanted to argue, but the fear in her gut told her they were right. If Victor was watching the ranch, waiting for an opportunity, the smart thing was to stay where Silas could protect her. The brave thing and the smart thing weren't always the same. Fine, she said. But I want to know what you find out. No keeping things from me to spare my feelings. Wouldn't dream of it, Silas said, and the ghost of a smile crossed his face before disappearing again. He left an hour later, his rifle across his saddle and his expression grim. Evelyn watched from the porch until he disappeared over the ridge, then went inside to help Martha with the washing. The work was mindless and physical, exactly what she needed to keep from dwelling on all the things that could go wrong. He'll be fine, Martha said, up to her elbows in soapy water. Man survived worse than one angry drunk with a wounded shoulder. I know. Evelyn wrung out a shirt with more force than necessary. I just hate sitting here waiting. Feels like being helpless all over again. Helpless is letting someone else control your life. Smart is knowing when to let people who care about you help carry the weight. Martha handed her another shirt. There's a difference. They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm of wash and wring and hang soothing in its repetition. Outside, the chickens scratched in the yard and the wind picked up again, carrying the smell of more weather coming. Winter was settling in for real now. Evelyn could feel it in her bones. Can I ask you something? Evelyn said eventually. Second time today. You're getting bold. Did Silas ever talk about his wife, his daughter? Martha's hand stilled in the water. Not much. Why? He mentioned his daughter the other night. Said she'd be my age if she'd lived. I just wondered what she was like. Never met her. They died before Silas moved out here. Martha resumed washing, her movement slower, more deliberate. But he keeps a picture. In his room, in a frame by the bed. Little girl, maybe 5 or 6. His wife was pretty, from what I could see. Dark hair, serious eyes. The girl looked like both of them. He must miss them terribly. Every day, I expect. But missing people and being consumed by it are different things. Silas carries his grief like he carries everything else. Quiet, contained, not letting it interfere with what needs doing. Martha glanced at her. Why all the questions? I don't know. I suppose I'm trying to understand him. Understanding Silas is like understanding this land. You can study it all you want, but in the end you just have to accept it on its own terms. Martha pulled the plug on the washtub, letting the water drain. He's a good man. Doesn't talk much. Doesn't show what he's feeling, but he's steady. In a place like this, steady's worth more than gold. Evelyn hung the last shirt and stepped back, looking at the line of laundry snapping in the wind. I think I'm falling in love with him. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. The words just came, bypassing her brain entirely. Martha turned to look at her, one eyebrow raised. Well, the older woman said, took you long enough to figure it out. You knew? Child, everyone knows. The way you look at each other when you think no one's watching, the way he goes out of his way to do things for you, the way you light up when he walks in a room. Martha shook her head. Only 2 people in this whole territory who don't know how you feel are you and him. And I'm starting to think you're both just being stubborn about it. Evelyn felt her face heat. He doesn't feel that way about me. He's just being kind. If you believe that, you're dumber than you look. Martha wiped her hands on her apron. But what you do about it is your business. Just don't wait too long to figure it out. Life's short and getting shorter, especially out here. Silas returned just before dark, his face tight with whatever he'd learned in town. He unsaddled his horse, fed and watered it, and only then came inside where Evelyn and Martha were waiting. He poured himself coffee and sat at the table, his movements tired. "Well?" Martha prompted when he didn't speak. "Victor's been seen. 3 different people reported a man matching his description hanging around town over the past week. Staying at the boarding house under a fake name, keeping to himself mostly, but asking questions about the school, about Evelyn." Evelyn's hands went cold. "What kind of questions?" "Her schedule, where she lives, whether she's ever alone." Silas's jaw tightened. "He's planning something. Don't know what yet, but he's not just passing through." "So what do we do?" "We prepare. I've asked some of the men in town to keep an eye out, report if they see him again. Callahan's agreed to close the school for a week, tell parents it's for repairs. That keeps you off a predictable schedule." He looked at her directly. "And you don't go anywhere alone? Not to town, not around the property, nowhere. If I'm not with you, Martha is. Understood?" It should have chafed, being treated like a prisoner in her own life. But Evelyn had seen the look in Victor's eyes that day in the street, and she knew Silas was right to be cautious. "Understood," she said. The next week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Evelyn stayed at the ranch, practicing her shooting, helping Martha with endless chores, reading until her eyes burned. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like a man with a gun. She slept poorly, the Colt always within reach, her dreams full of violence and blood. Silas doubled his patrols of the property, riding the fence lines at odd hours, checking sight lines and approach routes. He taught Evelyn where to position herself if someone attacked the house, which windows offered the best firing angles, where the spare ammunition was kept. It was practical, methodical preparation for something neither of them wanted to acknowledge might actually happen. On the 5th day, Martha cornered Evelyn in the kitchen. "You need to talk to him." "About what?" "About what's eating both of you. About whatever this is between you that neither one will name." Martha's expression was stern. "I'm tired of watching you two dance around each other like scared rabbits. Life's too short and too hard for that kind of foolishness." "It's not the right time. It's never the right time. That's the whole point. You wait for the perfect moment and you'll die waiting." Martha thrust a basket into her hands. "He's in the barn. Go talk to him. And don't come back until you've said what needs saying." The barn was warm with animal heat and the smell of hay. Evelyn found Silas in one of the stalls, examining a horse's hoof. He looked up when she entered, his expression questioning. "Martha sent me," she said, feeling suddenly foolish. "She said we need to talk." "About?" "I don't know. Everything. Nothing. The situation with Victor." She set down the basket. Empty, she realized now, just an excuse to get her out here. "I'm sorry for bringing this trouble to your door, for putting you in danger." Silas set down the horse's hoof and straightened. "You didn't bring trouble. Trouble followed you. That's different." "Is it? You could have turned me away that first day, could have told me to figure it out myself. Instead, you took me in, and now you're stuck dealing with a violent drunk who wants me dead and probably wants you dead too for interfering." "Evelyn, let me finish, please." She took a breath, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I need you to know that if anything happens to you because of me, I'll never forgive myself. You've given me everything, safety, purpose, a place to belong, and all I've given you in return is problems. That's not true, isn't it?" "No." He moved closer, his expression serious. "You want to know what you've given me? You've given me a reason to give a damn about something besides just surviving another day. You've reminded me that there are things worth protecting, worth fighting for. Before you showed up, I was just going through the motions. Now I'm actually living again." The words hit her like a physical force. "Silas." "I'm not finished either." His voice was rough, unpracticed at this kind of honesty. "I know I'm not good at this. Talking about feelings, saying the right things. Lost the habit after my wife died, figured I'd never need it again. But you make me want to try. And that scares the hell out of me because caring about someone means you can lose them, and I've already lost everyone I ever loved." "You haven't lost me. Not yet. But Victor's out there somewhere, planning. And I'm terrified that all my training, all my preparation, won't be enough when it matters." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hand. I can't lose you. I won't, whatever it takes. Evelyn leaned into his touch, her heart hammering. I'm falling in love with you. I think I have been for months. And I don't know what to do about it because the timing is terrible and everything's a mess, and he kissed her. It was gentle and desperate all at once, his hand sliding into her hair, pulling her closer. She kissed him back, tasting coffee and desperation and something that felt dangerously like hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. The timing is terrible, he agreed, and everything is a mess. But I'm done pretending I don't feel what I feel. Done acting like keeping my distance will somehow protect either of us. What do we do now? We deal with Victor. We end this, whatever it takes. And then we figure out the rest. He pulled back just enough to look at her properly. But I need you to promise me something. If things go bad, if Victor gets the upper hand, you run. You don't try to be a hero. You don't stay and fight. You get on a horse and you ride as far and fast as you can. Promise me. I can't promise that. Evelyn, no. I've spent my whole life running from things. From my father's death, from Victor, from anything that scared me. I'm done running. If Victor comes, we face him together. That's my promise. She could see him wanting to argue, to insist she stay safe at any cost. But something in her expression must have convinced him because he just nodded, his jaw tight. Together then, he said quietly. That night, Evelyn lay in bed replaying the kiss, the conversation, the feeling of Silas's hand in her hair. She'd never felt this way about anyone, not even in the early days with Victor, when she'd mistaken intensity for love. What she felt for Silas was different, steadier, deeper, rooted in respect and trust instead of romantic fantasy. She loved him, completely, terrifyingly, with no idea how it would all turn out. The answer came 2 days later, on a bitter cold morning when frost turned the world silver and the sky hung low and threatening. Evelyn was in the kitchen helping Martha prepare bread when they heard the shot. It was distant, coming from somewhere north of the house. A single crack that echoed across the frozen landscape, and then silence. Martha and Evelyn locked eyes, both of them knowing exactly what it meant. Get the rifle, Martha said, her voice deadly calm. I'll check the windows. Evelyn ran to her room, grabbed the Colt from under her pillow, and the rifle Silas kept loaded by the door. Her hand shook, but her mind was clear, running through everything Silas had taught her. Check your ammunition, pick your position, don't fire unless you have a clean shot. She found Martha at the front window, peering through the curtains. See anything? No, but that shot came from the north pasture. That's where Silas was checking fences. Another shot, then another. The sound of them made Evelyn's blood run cold because she recognized the rhythm. Someone was under fire, returning shots, locked in a gunfight that could only end one way. I'm going out there, Evelyn said. Like hell you are. Silas said, what? I don't care what Silas said. I'm not sitting here while he gets killed. She checked the rifle, made sure a round was chambered. You stay here. If anyone comes to the house who isn't me or Silas, you shoot them. Don't ask questions, don't hesitate, just shoot. Evelyn, wait. But she was already moving, out the door and into the freezing morning air. The world was eerily quiet now, the gunfire having stopped. She ran toward the north pasture, her boots slipping on frost-slicked ground, her breath coming in clouds. She found Silas behind an overturned water trough, blood seeping through his left sleeve, his gun trained on a cluster of rocks about 50 yards away. He saw her, and his expression went from relief to fury in the space of a heartbeat. What the hell are you doing here? He hissed. I told you to stay at the house. And I told you we face this together. She dropped down beside him, scanning the rocks. Where is he? Behind those rocks, ambushed me while I was fixing the fence. Got off 2 shots before I could take cover. He winced, pressing his hand to his wounded arm. Bullet went clean through. I'll live. How many? Just Victor, far as I can tell, but he's got position and cover. We're pinned. As if to prove his point, a shot rang out and something pinged off the metal trough inches from Evelyn's head. She ducked instinctively, her heart racing. Victor, Silas called out. This is stupid. You can't win this. Walk away while you still can. Walk away? Victor's voice drifted across the frozen ground, slurred and mean.
I rode 200 miles with a hole in my shoulder because of you. I'm not walking anywhere until I finish what I started.
You started this the day you put your hands on Evelyn. Everything since is just you refusing to accept the consequences. Consequences? Victor laughed, high and unstable. You want to talk about consequences? You took everything from me. My woman, my pride, my reputation. People laugh at me now, say I got beat by some frontier nobody and his whore. You think I can live with that? Evelyn felt Silas tense beside her. Let me handle this, he said quietly. He's trying to draw you out, make you angry enough to do something stupid. I know. But her hands tightened on the rifle anyway. Another shot, then another. Victor was firing wild now, rage overriding accuracy. One bullet kicked up dirt near Silas's boot. Another went wide by several feet. He's drinking, Silas observed. Probably been at it since dawn. That makes him dangerous and unpredictable. Can you hit him from here? Maybe, but the angle's bad, and if I miss, he'll just dig in deeper. Silas shifted, trying to get a better view of the rocks. We need to wait for him to make a mistake. They didn't have to wait long. Victor, emboldened by whiskey and rage, stood up from behind the rocks for a better shot. It was a stupid move, born of frustration and overconfidence, and it cost him everything. Silas fired. The shot took Victor in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him like a puppet with cut strings. He hit the ground and didn't move. The silence that followed was absolute. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just the sound of Evelyn's ragged breathing and Silas's pained exhale. Stay here, Silas said, struggling to his feet. I need to make sure he's down. Not a chance. We go together, remember? They approached the rocks slowly, weapons raised, ready for anything. But Victor was beyond threatening anyone now. He lay on his back, blood spreading across his chest in a dark stain, his eyes fixed and staring at the colorless sky. The gun had fallen from his hand, landing in the dirt a few feet away. Evelyn stared at him, waiting to feel something. Relief, maybe. Or grief for the man she'd once thought she loved. But there was nothing, just a vast, empty exhaustion. He's gone, Silas said quietly. It's over. Is it? Evelyn couldn't look away from Victor's face. It doesn't feel over. It will. Give it time. Silas holstered his gun and put his good arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Come on. We need to get back to the house, let Martha patch me up, then ride to town and report this to whoever passes for law around here. They walked back together through the frozen morning, leaving Victor's body behind them in the dirt. Martha met them at the door, took one look at Silas's arm, and immediately went into efficient medical mode, stripping off his shirt and examining the wound. Clean through, like you said. You're lucky. Don't feel lucky, Silas muttered, but he sat still while she cleaned and bandaged the wound with practiced efficiency. Evelyn stood by the window, watching the north pasture, half expecting to see Victor rise up like something from a nightmare, but the land stayed empty and still. You all right? Martha asked her. I don't know. Ask me in a year. Fair enough. Martha finished tying off the bandage. There. You'll live. Try not to get shot again for at least a month. Silas managed a weak smile. I'll do my best. They rode into town that afternoon, Silas's arm in a makeshift sling, Evelyn beside him on the wagon seat. They told their story to the de facto marshal, a former cavalry sergeant named Mackenzie, who served as law enforcement when needed. He listened, nodded, and agreed to ride out and collect Victor's body. Self-defense, Mackenzie said definitively. Man ambushed you on your own property with clear intent to kill. Territory law is pretty straightforward on that. There'll be questions, formalities, but nothing you need to worry about. News spread through Ash Hollow like wildfire. By the time they left Mackenzie's office, half the town had gathered in the street, wanting details, offering support. Anne hugged Evelyn fiercely, tears in her eyes. Callahan shook Silas's good hand and promised to keep the school closed another week if needed. You did what had to be done, he said gruffly. Anyone says different can answer to me. Evelyn felt the weight of the community's support like a physical thing, solid and real. These people had her back. They'd closed ranks around her when Victor first appeared, and they were doing it again now. Whatever Ash Hollow lacked in civilization and refinement, it made up for in loyalty. That night, back at the ranch, Evelyn found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She got up, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and went to sit on the porch. The sky was clear now, stars scattered like salt across black cloth, the moon a thin crescent that barely lit the landscape. Silas joined her a few minutes later, moving carefully with his injured arm. He sat beside her without speaking, and they watched the night together in companionable silence.
"You killed a man today," Evelyn said eventually. "How do you feel about that?" "Tired, relieved it wasn't you or me lying in that pasture." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't enjoy killing, but Victor made his choices and lived with the consequences. I can live with mine. Do you think it really is over, that we're safe now?"
Yes. Victor was the problem. With him gone, there's nothing left to run from. He shifted to look at her, his expression serious in the dim light. "Which means you have to figure out what comes next. If you want to keep teaching here, you can. If you want to leave, go somewhere bigger with better opportunities. I'll understand. The choice is yours." Evelyn thought about Philadelphia, about the life she'd left behind, about Denver and the fresh start that had turned into a nightmare, about all the places she could go, the things she could do, now that she was truly free. Then she thought about her students' faces when they finally understood a difficult concept, about Martha's sharp tongue and hidden kindness, about Silas's steady presence and the way his rare smiles transformed his entire face.
"I want to stay," she said. "I want to build something here, a real school, not just a room over a mercantile. A place where children can learn and grow and maybe have better options than their parents did." She took a breath. "And I want to see where this goes. Us, I mean. If you want that too." Silas was quiet for so long she thought she'd misread everything, made a fool of herself. Then he took her hand in his calloused fingers warm against her skin.
"I want that more than I've wanted anything in a very long time," he said quietly. "But I need you to understand what you're signing up for. I'm not easy. I don't talk about my feelings. I work too much. I've got ghosts that won't ever fully leave me alone. And this land, this life, it's hard in ways you can't imagine until you've lived through a few winters."
"I understand that. And I'm not easy either. I'm stubborn. I push back when I should compromise. I have my own ghosts." She squeezed his hand. "But maybe that's all right. Maybe two difficult people can figure out how to be difficult together." He laughed, a real one this time, the sound of it surprising them both. "Yeah, maybe they can."
They sat together on the porch until the cold drove them inside, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead. And for the first time since the stagecoach had thrown her into the dust, Evelyn felt something that might have been peace. Winter came down hard that year, turning the world into something mean and unforgiving. Snow fell in sheets that erased the horizon, wind howled through gaps in the barn walls, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze solid in its bucket overnight. Evelyn had thought she understood hardship, but frontier winter was a different animal entirely. Relentless, indifferent, capable of killing you if you made even one careless mistake. The school stayed closed through December. The roads were impassable, and parents weren't about to risk their children's lives for reading lessons when just staying warm and fed took every ounce of their energy. Evelyn spent those weeks at the ranch, learning the brutal rhythm of winter survival, hauling water before it froze, feeding animals in blizzard conditions, splitting wood until her hands blistered and her arms screamed. Martha watched her struggle through those first weeks with something approaching approval. "You're tougher than you look," she observed one evening after Evelyn had spent an hour digging a path to the chicken coop through waist-deep snow. "I don't feel tough. I feel half dead." "Same thing out here." Martha handed her a cup of something hot and alcoholic. "Drink that. You've earned it." Silas's arm healed slowly, the cold making the wound ache in ways that left him short-tempered and restless. He couldn't do half the work he was used to, which meant Evelyn and Martha had to pick up the slack. He hated it, hated being limited, hated relying on them, hated every reminder that he wasn't invincible. "You're being an ass," Martha told him bluntly one night when his temper finally boiled over about something trivial. "Your arm got shot. It's healing. Stop acting like it's a personal failing." "I'm not." "Yes, you are. And it's getting old." She stood, gathering dishes with sharp, angry movements. "Evelyn's worked herself to the bone keeping this place running while you heal, and you haven't thanked her once. So either get your head out of your backside or sleep in the barn until your manners return." She stalked out, leaving Silas and Evelyn alone in the uncomfortable silence. "She's right," Silas said finally.
I've been taking my frustration out on both of you. That's not fair. You were shot defending me. I think you're entitled to some frustration. Not at your expense. He flexed his injured arm, wincing. I'm not good at being helpless. Reminds me too much of after my family died, when I couldn't do anything except watch them fade. I know it's not the same, but the feeling is. Evelyn moved closer, sitting beside him at the table. You're not helpless. You're healing. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Helpless is what I was when Victor threw me off that stagecoach. What you are is temporarily limited, which isn't the same thing at all. She took his hand, tracing the calluses on his palm. And you're not alone. You've got me and Martha, and we're not going anywhere. He looked at their joined hands for a long moment. I love you, he said quietly, in case that wasn't clear.
It was the first time he'd said it outright. Evelyn felt something warm bloom in her chest, pushing back against the cold that seemed to have seeped into her bones. It was clear, she said, but it's nice to hear anyway. I love you too. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, his good hand cupping her face. When they pulled apart, he was almost smiling. Martha's going to be insufferable about this, you know. She'll say she told us so. She did tell us so, repeatedly. Doesn't mean we have to admit she was right. Christmas came and went with little fanfare. They were snowed in for 3 days, the world outside reduced to white static. Martha made a decent meal from their stores, roasted chicken, root vegetables, bread that was only slightly stale. They sat around the table and played cards by lamplight, the wind screaming outside like something alive and angry. You ever think about what you'd be doing if you weren't here? Martha asked during a lull in the game. Teaching somewhere warm, Evelyn said immediately, with indoor plumbing and buildings that don't leak when the wind blows. You'd be bored within a month, Silas said. Maybe. Probably. She studied her cards. What about you? What would you be doing? Same thing I'm doing now, just somewhere else. He laid down a card. I'm not built for cities or civilization. This is the only life that makes sense to me. That's depressing, Martha observed. It's honest. They played in silence for a while, the only sounds the snap of cards and the howl of the storm. Eventually, Martha won the hand and declared herself done for the night, leaving Silas and Evelyn alone by the dying fire. Can I ask you something? Evelyn said. You're going to whether I say yes or not. Fair point. She poked at the fire, sending up sparks. What would you think about getting married? Silas went very still. Are you proposing to me? I don't know. Maybe. Is that allowed? I don't think there's a rule book for this kind of thing. He was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable in the firelight. Are you sure? Marriage is permanent. Can't just walk away when things get hard. I don't want to walk away. I want to build something that lasts. She set down the poker and faced him. I know it's only been a few months. I know by any reasonable standard we should wait longer, make sure this is real. But life out here doesn't give you the luxury of time, does it? And I'm tired of being cautious. Caution got me engaged to Victor. Caution kept me in situations I should have left. Maybe it's time to try something different. So you want to marry me because you're tired of being cautious? I want to marry you because I love you and I trust you and I can't imagine my life without you in it. The not being cautious part is just a bonus. Silas laughed, the sound surprised out of him. That's possibly the worst proposal I've ever heard. It's the only proposal you've ever heard. True. He stood cross to where she sat and dropped to one knee in front of her. Evelyn Mercer, will you marry me? Before you answer, you should know that I'm difficult, I work too much, I'll probably never be good at talking about my feelings, and I come with a ranch that needs constant repair and a housekeeper who will interfere in everything. But I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. That's a much better proposal than mine. So is that a yes? Yes. Obviously, yes. He kissed her then, and it felt like sealing a promise that had been building since the day he'd pulled her out of the dirt in Ash Hollow. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. Martha appeared in the doorway looking smug. About damn time. I was starting to think I'd have to lock you two in a room together. How long have you been standing there? Evelyn asked. Long enough to hear the worst proposal in the history of the frontier, followed by a slightly better one. She came into the room carrying a bottle. This calls for celebration, or at least a drink. They stayed up late that night, drinking Martha's whiskey and making plans. The wedding would be simple, just them and whoever wanted to attend in Ash Hollow, probably at the schoolhouse since the settlement didn't have a proper church. Spring, they decided, when the weather cleared and people could actually travel. Martha would handle the logistics because neither Silas nor Evelyn had any idea how to plan a wedding, and Martha's organizational skills were legendary. "You'll need a dress," Martha said. "Something better than what you're wearing now. No offense." "None taken. I've been wearing the same 2 dresses for 6 months." Evelyn looked down at her patched skirt. "I don't suppose Ash Hollow has a dressmaker." "Not yet. But Anne's decent with a needle, and I'm not terrible myself. We'll figure something out." The storm broke the next morning, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow. Silas went out to check the animals and came back reporting 2 chickens dead from the cold and one of the horses with a bad cough. "It was the cost of winter," he said. "You prepared as best you could and accepted that you'd lose something anyway." January was harder than December. Food stores ran low. Evelyn lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, her dresses hanging loose on a frame that had never been heavy to begin with. The cold was constant, seeping through every layer of clothing, making her bones ache. She understood now why people went crazy out here, isolated and frozen for months on end with nothing but their own thoughts for company. But there were good moments too. Evenings by the fire with Silas, their chairs pulled close, reading aloud to each other from whatever books they could find. Martha teaching her to make bread that didn't come out like rocks. The first morning she woke to find the temperature above freezing, the promise of spring finally visible on the horizon. And through it all, the steady certainty that she'd chosen right. That whatever hardships came, she'd face them with people who mattered. February brought a thaw, and with it, the first visitors the ranch had seen in months. A family heading west, looking for land to claim. They stopped to rest their horses and ended up staying 3 days, swapping news and supplies. The father, a lean man named Thomas, had been a school teacher back east. "Heard there's a school in Ash Hollow," he said over dinner on their second night. "That true?" "Yes, I teach there." Evelyn passed him the bread. "Or I did, before winter closed everything down. I'm hoping to reopen in a few weeks." "You the only teacher?" "For now. Why?" Thomas exchanged glances with his wife. "We're looking to settle somewhere that values education. Our children are young now, but we want them to have opportunities. If Ash Hollow's serious about building a real school, we might stay. Help build it properly." "Thomas was a principal," his wife added, "back in Ohio. He knows how to organize curriculum, hire teachers, all of it." Evelyn felt something like excitement stir in her chest. "The settlement would be lucky to have you. We've been growing slowly, but we need people who can help build institutions, not just buildings." They talked late into the night about what a real school would look like. Multiple teachers, proper textbooks, maybe even separate rooms for different age groups. It was ambitious, probably too ambitious for a settlement that had barely existed a year ago. But talking about it made it feel possible. The family left on the 3rd day, promising to return in spring once they'd scouted the available land. Evelyn watched them go with a strange mix of hope and anxiety. If they came back, if they actually settled, it would change everything. The school would become real, permanent, something that could outlast her. "You're worried," Silas observed that evening. "I'm terrified. What if I can't do it? What if I'm not good enough to help build something that important?" "You've already built it. You started with nothing, no building, no students, no support, and you turned it into something people travel hundreds of miles to find. Adding help doesn't make that less impressive. It just means the thing you built is working. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention." She threw a dish towel at him. He caught it, grinning, and the moment of levity helped push back the anxiety. She could do this. She'd already done the hardest part, surviving. Everything else was just details. March came in like the proverbial lion, all wind and late snow that turned the roads to rivers of mud. But underneath the mess, you could feel spring gathering strength. Days grew longer. Birds returned. The first green shoots appeared in places the snow had melted. Evelyn reopened the school on a Tuesday morning, half expecting no one to show up. Instead, she found 20 children waiting, more than had attended before winter. Word had spread about the family heading west, about the possibility of a real school, and parents who'd been on the fence about education suddenly saw the value. She taught with a fervor that surprised her, pouring everything she'd learned and survived into making her students understand that knowledge was power and freedom and choice. Some days were better than others. Some days the children were restless and unfocused, and she wanted to scream. But most days, she saw progress, saw them connecting ideas, asking questions, becoming more than they'd been. Anne became a regular visitor, stopping by after school to continue her own lessons. She'd progressed beyond simple reading and was now working through more complex texts, her face fierce with concentration. "My husband doesn't know I come here," she admitted one afternoon. "He thinks I'm at the mercantile." Why lie? Because he'd disapprove. He thinks women learning too much gives them ideas. Anne's expression was carefully neutral. "He's not wrong. I've had plenty of ideas since I started reading." "What kind of ideas?" "The kind where I wonder why I have to ask permission to use money I helped earn, why I can't own property in my own name, why my opinions don't matter in decisions that affect my life." She closed the book carefully. "Don't worry, I'm not about to do anything dramatic, but it's strange, isn't it? How knowing more makes you see all the things that aren't right." Evelyn thought about her own journey, from Philadelphia naivety to Victor's brutality to this hard-won independence. It's not strange. It's dangerous. At least people who benefit from ignorance think it is. I suppose that's why they try so hard to keep us ignorant. They sat in silence for a moment, two women who'd learned the price of knowledge and decided it was worth paying. Planning the wedding became a welcome distraction from the harder questions about education and equality and what kind of world they were trying to build. Martha threw herself into the preparations with terrifying efficiency, organizing everything from the ceremony location to the food to who would officiate. "Mackenzie can do it," she announced. "He's got the authority, and he owes Silas a favor from that business with the cattle rustlers last year." "I didn't know Silas dealt with cattle rustlers," Evelyn said. "There's a lot you don't know about what that man's done. He doesn't talk about it because he doesn't see the point in bragging." Martha made a note on her increasingly long list. "Now, about your dress. Anne and I have been working on something. Want to see it?" The dress was simple but beautiful, cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Anne had done the detailed work, her stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. Evelyn ran her fingers over the fabric, overwhelmed. "It's perfect. When did you?" "We've been working on it since January," Anne said. "Martha described what you'd need, and I had the fabric from a dress my mother sent that never fit right. It seemed like a good use for it." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll wear it and not get emotional about it," Martha said gruffly. "We don't have time for crying. We've still got to figure out food and seating and 100 other details." The wedding was set for the second Saturday in April, weather permitting. Invitations went out. Nothing formal, just word of mouth spreading through Ash Hollow and the surrounding homesteads. People started confirming their attendance, promising to bring food and supplies for the celebration afterward. "Half the territory is going to show up," Silas observed, looking at Martha's list. "This is getting out of hand." "This is community," Martha corrected. "They want to celebrate something good after a hard winter. Let them." "I just wanted something small, just us." "Well, you're not getting it. Accept it and move on." Evelyn watched this exchange with amusement. Silas might be the nominal head of the household, but Martha ran things with an iron hand, and they all knew it. The week before the wedding, Thomas and his family returned. They'd found land north of Ash Hollow, good soil near a creek, and they'd brought lumber for a house and seeds for planting. Thomas sought out Evelyn at the school. "We're staying," he said without preamble, "and I'd like to talk to you about the school, about partnering to build something real." They spent hours that afternoon sketching plans. Thomas had ideas about curriculum and structure that Evelyn had never considered. He talked about education theory, about different teaching methods, about ways to engage children who came from different backgrounds. It was overwhelming and exciting in equal measure. "You're good at this," he said finally. "The practical teaching, the connecting with students. I can handle the administrative side, the long-term planning. Together, we could build something that lasts generations." "That's ambitious." "This whole territory is ambitious. Might as well aim high." Evelyn left that meeting feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. What had started as survival had turned into something bigger. A real school, a real community, a real future. It was terrifying and wonderful and more than she'd ever imagined for herself. The night before the wedding, Martha insisted Evelyn stay at the boarding house in town. Tradition, she said firmly. Groom doesn't see the bride until the ceremony. That's superstitious nonsense. Maybe, but we're doing it anyway. So Evelyn found herself in a small room above the saloon, listening to the sounds of Ash Hollow settling in for the night. Anne had come to keep her company, and they sat together by the window, watching the stars emerge. You nervous? Anne asked. Terrified, but not about marrying Silas, about everything else, about whether I can actually do this, build a school, help build a community, be the person people seem to think I am. You're already doing it. You have been since the day you arrived. Anne squeezed her hand. And you're not doing it alone. That's the difference between now and when you were with Victor. Then you were alone in trying to survive. Now you've got people. We'll help carry the weight. When did you get so wise? Been reading too much. Gives a person ideas. They laughed, and some of Evelyn's nervousness eased. Tomorrow she'd marry Silas and officially tie her life to this impossible settlement in the middle of nowhere. But tonight, she had a friend beside her and a future that felt less like a burden and more like a gift. Morning came clear and cold, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. Evelyn dressed with Anne's help, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage the buttons. The dress fit perfectly, transforming her from frontier teacher into something that might have walked out of a Philadelphia parlor. You look beautiful, Anne said softly. I look terrified. That too, but mostly beautiful. The ceremony was held in the schoolhouse, which had been cleaned and decorated with wildflowers that some of the children had gathered. Chairs were crammed in rows, packed with more people than Evelyn had realized even lived in the territory. She stood at the back, waiting for her cue, and felt the weight of all those eyes. Then she saw Silas at the front, wearing what had to be his only good suit, looking uncomfortable and nervous and completely perfect. And suddenly, none of the rest of it mattered. She walked down the makeshift aisle, past faces she recognized and some she didn't, and took her place beside him. His hand found hers, steady and warm. Mackenzie kept the ceremony short and practical, which suited them both. No flowery language about love conquering all or destiny bringing them together. Just simple vows about standing together through whatever came, about choosing each other every day, about building something worth keeping. Do you, Silas Boone, take this woman to be your wife? I do. And do you, Evelyn Mercer, take this man to be your husband? I do. Then by the authority vested in me by the territory, I pronounce you married. Silas, you can kiss her now before she changes her mind. He did, to the sound of cheering and applause that shook the schoolhouse walls. When they broke apart, both grinning, Evelyn caught sight of Martha in the front row, wiping her eyes and trying to look stern. The celebration afterwards spilled out into the street and lasted until well after dark. Someone had brought a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and impromptu music filled the evening air. People danced and drank and told stories, their laughter carrying across the settlement. Food appeared from everywhere: roasted meat, fresh bread, preserves that had been hoarded through winter, even a cake that Anne had somehow managed to make. Evelyn danced with Silas, with Thomas, with Callahan, with farmers whose names she barely knew but whose children she taught. She ate until she was full, drank until she was pleasantly warm, and let herself be happy in a way she'd never quite managed before. Late in the evening, she found Martha sitting on the school steps, watching the celebration with satisfaction. Thank you, Evelyn said, sitting beside her, for everything, for taking me in, for pushing me, for making all this happen. I didn't make anything happen. You did the work. I just provided commentary and organization. Martha was quiet for a moment. You've done good, girl. Better than good. You took nothing and built something worth having. That's rare. I had help. Everyone who does anything worth doing has help. Trick is being smart enough to accept it. Martha stood, brushing off her skirt. Now go find your husband. He's been looking for you for the past 10 minutes. Evelyn found Silas by the edge of the crowd, holding 2 cups of something that smelled suspiciously strong. He handed her one, and they stood together, watching their community celebrate. This is good, he said quietly. The whiskey? All of it, the wedding, the people, the future we're building. It's good. He took her hand. I'm glad you stayed. Glad you said yes. Glad you're here.
Me too.
They stayed until the celebration finally wound down, until the last guests had wandered home and the street was quiet again. Then they went back to the ranch, their ranch now, their home, and began the rest of their lives together. Marriage, Evelyn discovered, wasn't the fairy tale ending people pretended it was. It was work. Hard, daily work that required patience and compromise, and the willingness to have the same argument 17 different ways until you finally understood what the other person was actually saying. She and Silas fought about stupid things, about how much wood to cut for winter, about whether to expand the ranch or invest in the school, about her habit of leaving books scattered everywhere and his tendency to track mud through the house without noticing. Martha watched these early skirmishes with poorly concealed amusement. "You two fight like you've been married 20 years instead of 2 weeks," she observed one evening after a particularly heated discussion about chicken feed had ended with both of them storming off in opposite directions. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" Evelyn asked. "It means you're not pretending. Pretending is what kills marriages. Fighting means you care enough to disagree." Martha handed her a cup of coffee. "Besides, you always make up within an hour. That's the important part." She was right. The fights never lasted. Silas would find her reading in the barn, or she'd find him fixing something that didn't need fixing, and one of them would apologize or make a joke, and the tension would break. They'd talk it through, find some middle ground, and move forward. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real was better than the fantasy she'd built with Victor, all surface charm hiding rot underneath. Spring turned to summer, and the school project consumed more of Evelyn's time than she'd anticipated. Thomas proved to be exactly the partner she needed, organized where she was chaotic, strategic where she was impulsive. Together, they drafted plans for a proper building, complete with 2 classrooms, a small library, and space for future expansion. "We'll need funding," Thomas said, spreading architectural drawings across the table in the schoolhouse. "Lumber, labor, materials, it's going to cost more than the settlement can easily afford. What if we did it in stages?" Evelyn studied the plans, her mind working. Build 1 classroom now, add the second later when we have more students and more money. That could work. We'd need to design it so the addition doesn't require tearing down what we've already built. He made notes on the margins. "I'll talk to some of the farmers, see if any of them have construction experience. If we can get volunteers for the labor, that cuts costs significantly." The fundraising became a community effort. They held dinners where people paid what they could afford, organized a dance where admission was either money or materials, even convinced Callahan to donate a percentage of his mercantile profits for 3 months. It was slow, frustrating work, but the money accumulated. Meanwhile, Evelyn's student roster kept growing. By midsummer, she had 30 children of varying ages, more than she could effectively teach alone in the cramped space above the mercantile. She and Thomas started splitting duties. She took the younger children in the morning, he took the older ones in the afternoon, and they swapped for certain subjects where one of them had more expertise. It was exhausting. Most days Evelyn taught for 6 hours, then spent another 2 planning lessons and grading work. She'd come home to the ranch bone-tired, barely able to stay awake through dinner. Silas started doing more of the cooking, simple meals that didn't require much attention, and never complained when she fell asleep in her chair by the fire. "You're burning yourself out," he said one night, carrying her to bed when she'd dozed off mid-sentence. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're running on stubbornness and coffee, and that's not sustainable." He set her down gently, pulled off her boots. "The school matters. I know that. But you matter too. And if you collapse from exhaustion, you're no good to anyone. I just need to get through until the new building's done. Then Thomas can take on more, and I can cut back my hours. That's still months away. You need to slow down now before your body makes the decision for you." She knew he was right, but slowing down felt like failing, like admitting she couldn't handle what she'd taken on. She'd spent so long proving she was capable, proving she belonged here, that the thought of pulling back made her anxious. The decision was made for her in July, when she fainted during a lesson. One moment she was explaining long division, the next the floor was rushing up to meet her. She woke to find Thomas kneeling beside her, looking worried, while her students clustered nearby with wide, frightened eyes. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "You're not fine. You just collapsed." Thomas helped her sit up slowly. "When's the last time you ate a full meal?" She tried to remember and couldn't. "Yesterday." Maybe. Right." He stood, addressed the class with forced calm. School's dismissed for today. Everyone go home and tell your parents Miss Evelyn is all right. She just needs rest. The children filed out reluctantly, casting worried glances back. When they were gone, Thomas rounded on her.
This is unacceptable. You're teaching 30 children while barely eating or sleeping, planning a building project, running a household. Something has to give, and it's not going to be your health. I can handle it. Obviously, you can't. You just proved that by passing out in front of impressionable children who now think their teacher is dying. He softened slightly. I know you want to do everything, but this is exactly why we're partners, so you don't have to carry the whole weight alone. Silas was furious when he found out. Not at her exactly, but at the situation. At himself for not noticing how close to the edge she'd been running. I should have seen it, he said that evening, watching her eat the soup he'd made her finish. Should have put my foot down weeks ago. I would have argued. I know. Doesn't mean I shouldn't have tried harder. He sat across from her, his expression troubled. You're always so determined to prove you can handle everything on your own. But you don't have to. That's the whole point of what we're building here. Community, partnership, people helping people. You're allowed to accept help. I know that intellectually, it's just hard to actually do it. Why? She set down the spoon, considering. Because my whole life, accepting help meant giving someone power over me. My father controlled everything through money. Victor controlled everything through fear. Even good help came with strings attached, expectations I had to meet. So I learned to rely only on myself, because at least then I knew what I was getting. I'm not your father. I'm not Victor. Silas's voice was gentle but firm. And the people here aren't looking to control you. They're looking to support you because you've earned it, because you matter to them. There's a difference. I know you're not. I do. But old habits are hard to break. Then we'll break them together, starting now. He stood, collected the bowl. You're taking 3 days off from the school. Thomas can handle things. You're going to sleep, eat regular meals, and remember what it feels like to not be constantly exhausted. After that, we're sitting down and figuring out a schedule that doesn't kill you. Agreed? She wanted to argue, but looking at his face, seeing the genuine worry there, she found she didn't have the energy. Agreed, she said quietly. Those 3 days of rest felt strange and uncomfortable at first. Evelyn wasn't used to having unstructured time, to waking up without immediately having a dozen tasks demanding her attention. But gradually, as her body recovered, she started to appreciate it. Long mornings on the porch with coffee and a book, helping Martha in the garden without rushing. Evening rides with Silas across the property, just the two of them and the sunset. On the third day, Martha cornered her in the kitchen. You figure it out yet? Figure what out? Why you're so hell-bent on proving yourself you nearly killed yourself doing it. Evelyn considered lying, then decided against it. Martha had a way of seeing through deception that made it pointless. I'm scared, she admitted. Scared that if I slow down, if I'm not constantly proving my worth, people will realize I'm not actually that special, that I was just lucky to be in the right place at the right time, and someone else could do what I do just as well, or better. Martha snorted. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, and I've heard a lot of stupid things. It's how I feel. Feelings aren't facts. Fact is, you built something from nothing. Fact is, 30 children are learning because of you. Fact is, you've helped turn this settlement into a real community. None of that was luck. That was work and determination and refusing to give up when most people would have. Martha pointed a wooden spoon at her for emphasis. You want to know what makes you special? It's not that you don't need help. It's that you're smart enough to accept it when it's offered, even though it scares you. I'm not sure I am that smart. I nearly worked myself to death rather than admit I was struggling. Nobody's perfect. You made a mistake. Now you learn from it and do better. Martha turned back to whatever she was cooking. Besides, you've got people who won't let you make that mistake again. We're annoying like that. The conversation stayed with Evelyn long after it ended. She'd spent so much time running from her past, from Philadelphia's constraints, from Victor's violence, from every failure and disappointment, that she'd never stopped to actually look at what she'd built in the present. A school, a home, a marriage, a community that valued her not for what she proved, but for who she was. Maybe that was enough. Maybe she was enough just as she was,
flaws and limitations included. When she returned to teaching after her enforced rest, she did it differently. She accepted Thomas's offer to take on more of the administrative work. She let some of the older students help teach the younger ones, creating a mentorship system that benefited everyone. She started saying no to requests that would stretch her too thin, without guilt or elaborate explanations. And slowly, the constant anxiety that had driven her began to ease. The school building broke ground in August, on a plot of land the settlement had collectively purchased at the edge of town. Nearly every adult in Ash Hollow showed up for the first day of construction, ready to work. Farmers brought lumber they'd cut from their own land. Merchants donated nails and tools. Women organized food and water for the workers. Evelyn stood watching the organized chaos, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of community support, when she felt a hand on her shoulder. Silas stood beside her, his expression proud. "This is what you built," he said quietly. "Not the building. That's just wood and nails. But this. People working together for something that matters. That's your legacy. It's our legacy, all of us. Maybe, but you're the one who started it." The construction took 3 months. There were setbacks. A wall that had to be rebuilt when they discovered the wood was rotted. A week lost to rain that turned the site into a mud pit. A minor injury when someone dropped a hammer on their foot. But slowly, impossibly, the building took shape. 2 rooms, just as planned. Large windows that would let in light. A small alcove that would serve as a library once they had enough books to fill it. A porch where children could eat lunch when weather permitted. It wasn't grand or fancy, but it was solid and purposeful, and theirs. The dedication ceremony happened on a crisp October afternoon, exactly 1 year after Victor had ridden into town. Evelyn stood on the new porch, looking at the crowd gathered in front of the building, and felt time collapse in on itself. A year ago, she'd been terrified, certain that her past would destroy any chance at a future. Now she was married, settled, part of something larger than herself. Thomas gave a speech about the importance of education. Mackenzie said something appropriately official. Several parents spoke about what the school meant to their children. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She'd prepared remarks, careful words about community and opportunity and growth. But standing there, looking at the faces of people who'd become friends and family, the prepared speech felt wrong. Too formal. Too distant from the truth. "A year ago," she said instead, "I arrived in Ash Hollow with nothing. No money, no prospects, no future. I'd been thrown away like garbage by someone who was supposed to love me, and I had no idea if I'd survive the week, much less build anything lasting." She saw Silas in the crowd, his expression steady and encouraging. "What I found here wasn't just a place to hide. It was people willing to take a chance on a stranger, willing to let me prove myself, to fail and try again, to become part of something bigger than my own survival." Her voice caught slightly. "This building represents more than education. It represents the idea that broken things can be mended, that people who've been discarded can find purpose. That community isn't something you're born into. It's something you build, day by day, choice by choice." She gestured to the building behind her. "We built this together, and we'll keep building. More classrooms, more opportunities, more futures for children who deserve better than what their parents had. Because that's what we do. We take nothing and turn it into something. We take broken people and give them a place to heal. We build futures out of scraps and determination and refusal to give up." The applause when she finished was thunderous. People surged forward to shake her hand, to offer congratulations, to share their own stories of starting over and building new lives. Evelyn accepted it all with grace she'd learned to wear more comfortably, no longer terrified that acceptance meant obligation. That evening, back at the ranch, she and Silas sat on the porch watching the sunset. The light turned everything gold and amber, softening the harsh lines of the landscape into something almost gentle. "You did good today," Silas said. "The speech, I mean. It was honest. I'm tired of pretending things are easier than they are. Tired of acting like I have everything figured out." She leaned against his shoulder. "Is it always going to be this hard? Building something that lasts?" "Probably. The things worth having usually are." He wrapped an arm around her. "But it gets easier when you stop trying to do it alone." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, one by one, pinpricks of light in the gathering dark. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called.
The wind carried the smell of coming winter, cold and clean. "I'm pregnant," Evelyn said quietly. She felt Silas go completely still beside her. "You're sure?"
Pretty sure. Martha confirmed it this morning. She says I'm about 2 months along. How do you feel about it? It was such a Silas question, not assuming her feelings, just asking. She considered carefully before answering. Terrified. Excited. Overwhelmed. All of it at once. She turned to look at him. How do you feel? Same. Plus guilty. Guilty? For being happy about it when I know what I lost before. Feels like betraying their memory somehow, being excited about a new child when my daughter is dead. His voice was rough with emotion he rarely showed. But I am excited, and that makes the guilt worse. Evelyn took his hand, threading her fingers through his. You're allowed to be happy. Your daughter would want you to be happy, and this child won't replace her. Nothing could. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for both grief and joy. You sound very wise for someone who's terrified. I'm faking it, but Martha says that's half of parenting anyway, pretending you know what you're doing until eventually you actually do. He laughed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. When's the baby due? April, near as Martha can tell. Spring. That's fitting. New life in spring. He pulled her closer, his hand settling protectively over her still flat stomach. We're going to have a child. That's real. Very real and completely terrifying. Yeah, but we'll figure it out. We always do. Winter came again, harder than the year before, but Evelyn was prepared for it now. She knew how to layer clothing against the cold, how to conserve energy for the tasks that mattered, how to find moments of warmth even when the world outside was frozen. The school stayed open through December, the new building well insulated enough that students could learn in relative comfort. Her pregnancy progressed with minimal complications, though Martha watched her like a hawk and forbade any heavy lifting or overexertion. Thomas took on more of the teaching responsibilities without being asked, and Evelyn learned to accept the help without feeling like she was failing. She and Silas spent long evenings discussing names, painting a small nursery in what had been storage space, preparing for a future that felt simultaneously impossible and inevitable. Silas carved a cradle from oak, his hands patient and careful, sanding it smooth enough that no splinter could harm delicate skin. I hope I'm a good father, he said one night, running his hand over the finished wood. I don't remember much about raising my daughter. She was so young when she died. What if I don't know what to do? Then we'll figure it out together, same as everything else. Evelyn watched him work, seeing the vulnerability he tried to hide. You're going to be wonderful. You already are. Martha announced her intention to stay on indefinitely, transforming from housekeeper to something closer to family. Someone needs to teach you two how to keep a baby alive, she said gruffly. Might as well be me. The baby came on a warm April morning, 3 days after Evelyn's 26th birthday. Labor was long and brutal and nothing like the sanitized descriptions she'd read in books. Martha coached her through it with stern encouragement, and Silas held her hand until she thought she'd broken his fingers. When their daughter finally arrived, small and red-faced and screaming with impressive lung power, Evelyn understood for the first time why people did this impossible thing, why they risked everything for a tiny person who depended on them completely. She's perfect, Silas said, his voice choked with emotion as he held their daughter for the first time. She's absolutely perfect. She's wrinkled and loud and has no hair, Martha observed. But yes, she's perfect. They named her Clara, after Silas's mother. Clara Boone, born into a world that was hard and uncertain, but held more possibility than the one Evelyn had left behind in Philadelphia. The settlement celebrated the birth like it was everyone's child, not just theirs. People brought gifts, hand-sewn clothes, carved toys, jars of preserved food to help during those early exhausting weeks. The school closed for 3 days so Thomas could organize a proper welcome ceremony. Evelyn spent those first weeks in a haze of exhaustion and wonder. Clara nursed constantly, slept in unpredictable bursts, and demanded attention with a forcefulness that suggested she'd inherited both her parents' stubborn streaks. But in the quiet moments, rocking her to sleep at dawn, watching Silas sing to her in his rough, off-key voice, seeing Martha's face soften when she held her, Evelyn felt something settle in her chest. This was what she'd been running toward all along. Not perfection, not safety. Just this: a life built on choices instead of circumstances, surrounded by people who chose to love her not despite her flaws but including them. She returned to teaching when Clara was 2 months old, bringing the baby with her. It was chaotic and imperfect. Lessons interrupted by feeding schedules, students taking turns holding her while Evelyn wrote on the board, but it worked. The children were fascinated by the baby, treating her like a communal mascot. Several of the girls started bringing dolls to practice what Evelyn was doing, preparing for their own futures. Thomas hired a young woman named Rebecca to help with the younger students, giving Evelyn more flexibility to balance teaching and motherhood. Rebecca was smart and eager and reminded Evelyn of herself years ago, full of potential, just waiting for the right opportunity. "You're building something that will outlast you," Thomas observed one afternoon, watching Rebecca lead a reading group with natural skill. Teachers teaching teachers. That's how legacies work. "I just wanted to survive," Evelyn said. "Everything else was accidental. The best things usually are." The years rolled forward with a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. Clara grew from infant to toddler to small child, quick and bright and determined. She had Silas's dark hair and Evelyn's stubborn chin, and she approached the world with a fearlessness that both terrified and delighted her parents. The school expanded again, adding a third classroom and hiring another teacher. Ash Hollow grew from settlement to town, with a proper main street, multiple businesses, and even a small newspaper. The railroad came through in 1880, bringing more people and more opportunities. Evelyn and Silas had 2 more children, a son named James and another daughter named Ruth. The ranch expanded to accommodate the growing family, adding rooms and outbuildings as needed. Martha stayed through it all, aging but never softening, ruling the household with benevolent tyranny. There were hard times, too. A drought that nearly killed the crops, a fever that swept through town and took several children, though miraculously spared theirs, arguments and setbacks and moments when Evelyn wondered if they'd made the right choices. But they survived. They adapted. They kept building. On a clear morning in October 1885, Evelyn stood on the porch of the ranch watching her children play in the yard. Clara, now 9, was teaching 7-year-old James to read while 5-year-old Ruth attempted to climb a tree Martha had explicitly forbidden. Silas was in the barn, and Martha was in the kitchen making bread, and everything was ordinary and imperfect and exactly right. She thought about the woman she'd been 9 years ago, broken, desperate, certain her life was over at 23. If she could go back and tell that woman what waited ahead, she wasn't sure she'd be believed. The idea that failure could transform into something this solid, this real, seemed impossible from the outside. But here it was. A marriage that worked not because it was easy, but because they chose it every day. Children who would grow up knowing they were wanted. A school that had educated hundreds of students and would educate hundreds more. A community she'd helped build from scraps and determination. "Mom!" Ruth's voice carried across the yard. "Clara says I can't climb trees because I'm a girl, but you climb trees sometimes, so that can't be right." Evelyn smiled, walking toward her children to mediate yet another philosophical debate about what girls could and couldn't do. Some battles never ended. You just fought them in different forms across generations. But that was all right. Fighting for what mattered was part of the point. That evening, after the children were in bed and Martha had retired to her room, Evelyn and Silas sat together on the porch. It had become their ritual over the years, this quiet time when the day was done and they could just exist together without demands or expectations. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd left me in that street?" Evelyn asked. "If you just kept walking?" "Sometimes, but not often. No point dwelling on roads not taken." He took her hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her palm. "Why?" "I was just thinking about how much has changed, how different everything is from what I expected. Better or worse?" "Different. Better in ways I couldn't have imagined, harder in others." She leaned against him. "But I wouldn't change it, any of it. Even the terrible parts led here." That's philosophy talking. The terrible parts were still terrible. "I know, but they taught me things I needed to learn, about strength and resilience, and what I was capable of surviving." She paused. "Victor thought throwing me away would destroy me. Instead, it freed me to become someone better than I could have been with him." "He did you a favor then, inadvertently. The worst favor anyone ever did." "But, yes, She was quiet for a moment, listening to the night sounds, crickets, distant cattle, the wind in the trees. Do you think we're doing right by the children? Teaching them well enough? Preparing them for the world? I think we're doing our best, which is all anyone can do. They'll make their own mistakes, learn their own lessons. Our job is just to give them a foundation strong enough to build on. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just weren't listening. She laughed, the sound carrying across the darkened yard. Somewhere inside, one of the children called out in their sleep, and Martha's voice answered, soothing. The ranch settled around them, solid and real and home. I love you, Evelyn said. I don't say it enough, but I do. You saved my life. You saved your own life. I just gave you a place to do it. He kissed her temple. But I love you too. More than I thought I could love anything after losing my first family. You taught me that hearts can heal if you give them enough time and reason. They sat together as the stars emerged, two people who'd found each other in desperation and built something lasting through determination and daily choice. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and full of possibility, but they'd face it the way they'd faced everything else. Together, imperfect, stubborn, and alive. Inside the house, Claire had gotten out of bed and was teaching James his letters by lamplight, her voice patient and firm. Ruth slept sprawled across her bed like she'd been thrown there. Martha sat in her rocking chair, mending by firelight, humming tunelessly. This was the legacy. Not perfection, not some idealized version of frontier life. Just people doing their best with what they had, building futures out of scraps, turning broken things into something whole. Years later, when Evelyn's hair had gone gray and her children had children of their own, someone would ask her what the secret was, how she'd survived everything she'd survived and still built something beautiful. She'd think about it carefully, because it was an important question that deserved an honest answer. There's no secret, she'd say finally. Just a series of choices. To get up after being knocked down. To accept help even when it's frightening. To build something instead of just surviving. To believe that broken things can be mended, including yourself. That's it? That's everything. The rest is just details. And it was true. All of it. The school that still stood 70 years later, the town that had grown from nothing, the children and grandchildren who carried pieces of her forward into a future she'd never see. It all came down to those simple choices made day after day after day. To survive. To build. To love, despite the risk. To believe that tomorrow could be better than today, and then do the work to make it so. That was the whole story. Everything else was just the telling of it.